Hi guys, welcome back to Miniature Fairy Tales. My name is Carissa and today I'm going to show you how I made this 1/24 scale coffee table. Now you can see here it's got quite a few carvings on the sides and down the legs. It's got two working drawers on one side and it has some open shelves on the other side. I'm really pleased with how this little piece has turned out. I do feel like the materials I've used have mimicked wood really well, so I'm so excited to share this project with you today, and I hope that you'll find some inspiration from what I've done here for your future projects. So sit back, relax, and I so hope you enjoy. So here we are back at my cutting mat, and I'm just going to give this little guy a bit of a spin around so that you can see the shelves on the back, and then I'm going to take you through what pieces are required to start construction. I'm now going to take you through the materials for this piece. So you'll see I have a frame up there in 600 GSM cardstock, and these are sections of the coffee table. The acetate is also there on the left. Those two pretty little decorative pieces are pieces I designed, and then they are cut from 200 GSM cardstock. So all of the carvings are made out of 200 GSM cardstock, and the rest of the construction is made from 600 GSM cardstock, and the only difference in all of that is the acetate, obviously. Now you will see between those decorative pieces and those T-shaped pieces that say bottom, there is like a sideways T-shaped piece there. That is not actually part of the construction, but we use that as a guide. So that guides you to find the middle point of the coffee table, which I'll help you to understand a bit better later. So underneath there I have parts for the drawers. The parts marked DU are the bottom parts of the drawers. Parts marked DS are the sides of the drawers, and DB is the drawer backings, and DF is the drawer fronts. And then just a little bit down from the drawer sides there you'll see the SP part, or parts now. So they are my side panels. Next to that you'll see IP, which is the inner panel. So that is an inside panel that goes across the middle of the coffee table. And then below IP you'll see some smaller IP parts, and they are the middle sections of the drawers and the shelves. And then you'll see all of those parts over to the right hand side of the screen, and they all make up the legs of the coffee table. So those legs are layered up in 5 pieces each. So one leg equals 5 layers of 600 GSM cardstock. Now you'll see I'm playing with some little leafy looking bits up the top there, and they're actually the offcuts from those pretty decorative pieces that I made. So we're going to use those to help us with the carving in the sides of the piece later. So we're trying not to waste as much as we can, and trying to add as much decoration to the piece as we can as well. So right now I'm showing you which parts sit where on the actual piece, so that this will help you. So these little 200 GSM parts for finishing around the side, these parts are the drawers. These are your side panels. That's your inner panel, so that goes across the middle of the coffee table, and you'll see I'm about to show you that in a weird, awkward kind of way. See, it's in there. and it forms the back of the drawers and the back of the shelves. And these are your inner panels. And these parts are all of your legs. The decorative pieces are for the carvings on your legs, and those ones are for the carvings on the sides. Oh, and on the drawers. Alright, let's get into it. So as you can see by the T on my bottle, I'm using tacky glue today for this cardstock, and at the moment I'm starting to glue the legs together. So I basically, because I have 5 layers per leg, I am doing them up in pairs. So for each leg there will be 2 pairs and 1 piece left over. And with that 1 piece left over, I'll be using that to adhere one lot of the carvings to. And then when the 2 pairs and the 1 piece are all together, then on the side of all those layers will go the other carved piece for the corner of the legs. So it does take some time just to go through each of these and putting them together. Now it's 600 GSM cardstock, so it's a bit thicker than Cricut craft board, which is probably between 350 and 400 GSM. That's kind of what I've worked out the equivalent to be. So with this thicker board and working at this very small scale, basically how I do this, because the parts are quite small, I just plonk one bit on top of the other and I use my fingers and my mat to line everything up, and use quite a firm hand to push them together. You do want them to be nice and flush and neat, but again, working at this very small scale, it is difficult sometimes to handle these little pieces. So tacky glue allows you a little bit of time, as I've told you many times previously. You've got a bit of leeway time with tacky glue, so plonk it on the top and then line them up as you're pushing them together. You might also notice here that I am working on top of greaseproof paper, or you might have wondered what that paper was. It's just simple cooking paper from the kitchen, and this helps me in a couple of ways. When I'm gluing my pieces together, they will not stick to this greaseproof paper, or if they do, it'll be fairly easy to pull them away. Unless you paint on it, as I discovered, unless you paint on it first and then glue after, the glue will stick to the paint. So do be aware of that. Aside from that though, it helps to keep your mat very clean, and it is just easier to glue on or paint on to save your mat. So I have got myself in the habit of using this paper quite a lot when I'm doing my crafting. So here at the moment I'm pulling out my little decorative pieces for the legs, and as I'm doing that I am getting rid of some of the offcuts that haven't quite come out. Now you'll see that some of my little decorative pieces have lost part of one of their loops. You'll see it as I'm gluing here. I'm not overly concerned about this because it's a very, very small scale, and when everything's together it's not going to be that noticeable when you're looking at it. So I'm not overly concerned that some of them are going to have a full loop and some of them aren't, because yeah, when the piece is together it's really not noticeable. So all I'm doing is taking the least amount of tacky glue that I can and attaching these onto those singular pieces that are left over after I've done up all of my pairs of legs. So we're just adding a little bit of glue and popping them on now and setting them aside to dry. I've now moved on to those decorative pieces which will form carvings on the top of the coffee table. Now mine are not fully symmetrical, so I have to spin these pieces around until I get a exact match, because I'm just layering them up for a bit of extra thickness, and once I do get them in the right position I glue them straight away so that I don't get them confused. So I'm just adding again a light layer of tacky glue and trying my very best to line these up perfectly, because I do want them to look like they've got some depth to them, and I don't want to see the edges of the other piece, so I am trying to be very careful. And then once I've done that, I'll use my skewer or my toothpick to run around the outside and get rid of any excess that might have formed. Now moving on to the base pieces for the top part of the coffee table. These are marked TT, top tier, I think that's for. I have crazy labeling sometimes. So there are two of these and they're both 600 GSM, and I'm going to layer those up. And then that decorative piece will go straight on top of those. So I have the thick layer at the bottom, and these two 200 GSMs will go on top of that. So you can already see that the different depths of the cardstock are helping me to create what looks like carvings. And once I add, you know, my Mod Podge and my paint and my varnish, it will all come together and it will look like this piece has been carved from this square of wood. And now I turn over that top tier, and I'm going to add the part marked bottom. It is the T shape or the cross shape, whichever you like to call it. And I'll put the label inward and I'll match up the long edges, and so that is going to give me those 4 little squares, and that's going to form the basis for where my legs will sit. So it's going to give me a nice snug little corner to pop my legs into. And heading back to my legs now, I'll just sit that other top part aside to dry. I am adding the pairs together, so I'm making the 2-piece parts into 4-piece parts. So this will give me 4 of those, and then I'll be able to add my decorative piece to the very top of each of them. Once I've set those aside to dry, I can now move on to my inner panels. So there are 4 of these short inner panels, and I want to double those up to make 2 inner panels, if that makes sense. So each inner panel has 2 layers. And of course, I am gluing my labels inward so that we can't see them. I've decided to start working on my drawers now, so the drawer sides will connect to the top long edge of the under piece, DU. So we'll be adding a layer of glue to the long edge of the drawer side, and we'll be adding that to the top long edge of that DU part, the bottom of the drawer. And I find it's easier to hold on to the larger piece and bring that larger piece into the shorter piece, just to make sure that I've got more control when I'm holding on to them. So we can put all of those together, and then we can add our drawer back on. And the drawback in this instance for these drawers connects to all three sides of the back. So it will connect to the edges of the sides and the edge of the bottom part, forming the back. Now I like to do this while everything is not yet completely dry, because I do like a little bit of flexibility to move things and put them together accordingly. So I do suggest you get your backs on pretty much straight away, and that way you still have some flexibility to be able to move the sides and make sure that everything matches up nicely. Okay, so whilst I have those other parts aside drying now, I have put a little bit of Mod Podge into one of my little ceramic containers there, and basically I'm going around all of my parts and sealing them with Mod Podge. Now I've just done this to make my painting easier, so Mod Podge will help to seal these pieces and will allow me to add less paint. It won't soak into the pieces as much as it would without Mod Podge. So the other thing about Mod Podge is it adds a little bit of a gloss, and it changes the way that your paint goes onto a piece sometimes. So it kind of, or in my experience, it kind of thinned out my paint almost. You'll understand when you use it. You can see here also when you're Mod Podging, when you go through the ink parts of the labels, if you use a Cricut Maker like I do, it does spread the ink, so it won't harm your piece. You'll be able to paint straight over the top of that, but I just thought I'd mention it because yeah, some people may think that the piece is ruined if that happens. It's not at all. So Mod Podge everything, and these cross shapes here, they are not to be layered. They are two separate pieces, so they need to be Mod Podged, as does everything else that's now layered up together. You'll also find that your Mod Podge dries fairly quickly, so you'll very quickly be able to move on to your next step. So I have taken one of the side pieces here, one of the side panels, SP, and I'm now taking the larger leafy pieces that have come out of the inside of that decorative piece for the top of the coffee table, and I have laid them across as a line of 3, and then I've taken some of the smaller leafy pieces that have come out of the small carving parts for the legs, and I'm just dropping 2 of those on an angle at the base between these 3. And this is going to make a nice decoration for me, so that when I glue these down and it's painted, it's going to look like carvings. So I usually just dry trial first and make sure that I'm happy with where things are going to go, and then I take them off piece by piece and I just glue them in place with tacky glue. Now sometimes with these super duper small pieces, I like to just put the glue in place and then drop my little pieces on top. It's actually far easier to do it this way than to try and glue the actual piece. So you could do either. And as there are 2 side panels, we'll be doing the same decoration on both of those side panels, and also remembering to do it on these, to glue them on the side that doesn't have the label, because the label will face inward. And once those are done, the next thing that I want to move on to is the front of my drawers. So I am taking the middle leafed sized pieces. So I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe that they are out of the top piece, but out of the middle parts of the top piece, if that makes sense. So I select 2 of those for each drawer, and the circular bit that comes out of the middle of the top decorative piece. And that just goes on top of those other 2 parts. So I glue them in place, and then as usual I just use my skewer around the edges, and then once they're dry we'll be able to Mod Podge over the top of those as well. So I now just want to quickly take you back to the legs. So there is a decorative piece on 2 sides of those legs, one on one layer and one on one side that has the layering, if that makes sense. And that's because the 2 sides that will face inward on the coffee table will not have the carvings, and the 2 sides that face outward will have the carvings on them. So I just wanted to bring that into view here, as I'm not sure I got that on film before. Okay, we're going to move straight into our painting now. So I've used 1 part raw umber with 2 parts yellow ochre, and I've ended up with this green sort of a colour. So what I've done is I've just added a little tiny bit of burnt umber to that, and that's going to bring me back to a brown, but it's going to give me the brown without the red tones, which is what I was kind of looking for. So this will be my main colour, and this is derived from those three colours. So you'll see here I do have a wet brush, but I am just lightly painting this over the carving because I'm not entirely sure how it's going to look once it goes on. And you can see what I mean about the Mod Podge. It gives the paint a bit of a thinner look to start with. So it would be very easy for you to use a very light layer and make it look like stained wood if that was the look you were going for. And you can see here just by the different brush strokes and things like that how easy it would be to do that. You find that the paint sort of gathers in around that carved area and gives it more of a 3D look. So depending on the amount of paint that you use, you can definitely dress this up in any way that you like. What I find is that my brush strokes actually are what give me the wood grain look. In 124 that's quite easy to obtain from your brush strokes. So I tend to always brush in the same direction to try and mimic that wood look. And you'll see later when the piece is dried how this works and how it gives me that stained or that brushed that wood grain look from the strokes. So I'm working my way through all of the pieces now, and I am using this main colour on all the parts that will show, particularly on the inside pieces, because I know that I don't want any white parts showing when my drawers are opened or things like that. So I want to make sure that everything is painted and covered. So it takes me about 2 coats to get to where I want to be with this piece. And rather than bore you and make you watch every single piece that I paint, I'm just going to skip ahead. I did just want to mention here on this top piece, those 4 little squares that the legs are going to sit into. I don't want to paint them, and my reason for this is that I don't want to take up any room from where the legs will sit, and we won't be able to see the joins anyway because that will all be covered with the 4 strips of finishing that I will use around the edges. So just don't paint into there. It will make gluing easier, and your glue will be stronger also if we make sure that there's no paint in those joins. Crikey, I'm definitely not the tidiest painter, that's for sure. But I think that's half of the fun, is just getting in and getting it done. I don't know, paint washes off. That's my theory anyway. Okay, so let's move on to our acetate now. I don't know about you, but I always cut my acetate with the protective layers still on it, and then I peel those off later. So I'm doing that now, and I am going to add that piece of acetate to the back side of this brown frame part here. So using my gem glue, I'm just putting a really thin layer around the inside of that frame part, and then adding my acetate to the top of that. Now you can see that the gem glue is quite thin, and with the paint it seems to be thinner again. Don't worry about this, it will still dry and it will still hold your acetate really well. Like usual, I would get rid of any excess while it's wet, and then just stick that aside to dry. Now, with all of my messy painting out of the way, I'm just going to spin my my piece of greaseproof paper around, because that's going to help me with my gluing, because I don't want to glue on top of the paint, as I mentioned earlier. And I also got rid of the rest of those little off-cut pieces because we don't need them anymore. Now I'm heading into my favourite part, varnishing. So I use Art Spectrum gloss varnish, and this contains mineral turpentine, which can be quite fumey. So if you do use this product, do make sure that you've got some adequate ventilation. And basically what I want to do here is I want to paint these top parts with varnish first before I put them together, because obviously once this frame with the acetate goes on top of that decorative carved part, we're not going to be able to varnish that anymore. So I've got to get into it before I put those parts together. So I've added a layer to those parts, and while I'm at it, I'm just going to add a layer of varnish to everything else as well, and allow some adequate drying time. Hopefully by the time I get to the end of this, those top parts of the coffee table will be ready to glue together. Now, a few things about varnish. Varnish, I believe, is the key thing to making your wood look like wood. That's in my opinion. You can also see that with this particular varnish, it does add more brush strokes, which again makes your wood look more authentic. So I do highly recommend varnishing your pieces once they're painted. It just brings out the colour, makes everything look far more authentic, and you can see on these side panel parts that's getting a really realistic wood look now, and it's due back to the varnish. So do consider adding this into your craft inventory, because personally for me, I found it's been really a help in getting my pieces to look like wood at the end. Okay, so after some sufficient drying time, I'm now going to add that top frame onto the top of the decorative piece. So it's just a bit of tacky glue around the edge, and then I'm going to take extra special care to try and push that down as much as possible. So you can see I'm using my brayer for that here. I do have a little bit of tacky glue that's popped through the side there, but I'm not too concerned, it will dry clear. Sometimes we can't do too much about this, and because that carving is now enclosed under the acetate, there's no way we can get into there, so it'll be okay. Once that is glued down, I then turn the piece over and add tacky glue into those 4 little squares so that I can now add my legs. So when you add your legs, I take care to make sure that the 2 sides that don't have carvings are facing inward when I glue them down, and the 2 sides that have carvings are facing outward, so that when the piece is finished they will be showing to the outside and you'll be able to see them clearly. So I do make a point of pushing these into the inside corner of those little square openings, And don't be concerned if there's a gap around the outside, because we do have finishing pieces that are going to go around the outside edge to make everything look nice and neat and tidy. So while those legs are sitting aside to dry, we can now move on to the bottom piece of the coffee table, and you can see here I'm using that guide part that I talked about to find the middle of the bottom cross section that I'm going to use as the base of the coffee table. And I have lined up the long middle inner panel against that, and that has shown me where the middle is. And while that inner panel is there, I'm then taking each side panel and lining that up with the edge of the bottom piece, and also with that inner panel. So the inner panel gets a little bit of glue on the edge, and the side panel gets glue down its long edge, and then they all join together on top of that bottom piece. So we have what looks like an H in the middle of that bottom piece. So that is going to form the framework of our bottom cavity. On one side will sit the drawers, and on the other side will sit the shelves. So at the moment I'm just having a look to make sure that my drawers are going to fit in there okay, and yes they are. And once I'm able to put that in place, I can then take my inside panels and add them into the piece. So you can see here I'm using my drawers as a guide to where the middle is, so I know where I need to adhere that inside piece to. So I have put glue on the shorter edge and the longer edge, and I have put that right in the middle of where those drawers would be. So that's given me a really good indication of where that inside panel needs to be, so that once the piece is fully put together, everything's still going to fit. And now that I have this inside piece in place, I can then attach the other inside piece based on where this one is. So now I'm adding some tacky glue to all of the edges that are going to attach to the top part. And it's very easy to line up. You just line up all of those edges and make sure that those square cutouts on the outside are all free and lined up. You can sit it on its side to make sure that the edges are lined up. Now of course we're going to dry trial the top part with the legs and make sure that everything is going to fit into place. So I do find it is a little bit snug, but you do have a little bit of flexibility, so don't be afraid to stretch your legs out a little bit to make them fit, and then once you're happy you can glue those inside corners and of each corner part, and also those little bits that come down and join, and then you just slide it into place. Now of course you're not going to slide it right down, because you want a gap between the top part and the base of the coffee table, so you just want to slide it down until your legs are level with the bottom piece, and then you can use your skewer and some paper towel to clear away any excess glue that you might have. And then what I like to do is I like to sit it down on something level and get my finger in between the gap between the top and the bottom part and push it down just to make sure that it is level with the bottom of the feet. And then of course I put my drawers in and out and make sure that everything fits there as well. The next thing that we're going to do is add our finishing pieces to the outside edge of the top layer. So one side I actually didn't get to painting, so I'll need to fix that up, but just add tacky glue to one paste those around the edges, lining them up with the top to make sure that everything's level, and of course bringing them into that corner to make sure that everything is lined up. Now in the end it should look like you have a very sturdy piece of wood on the top of your coffee table, which has a piece carved out of it which is sitting under glass. That was at least the idea I had when I was designing it. Now if you wanted more depth between that acetate and where the carving is, you could simply add more layers to the frame and give it a bit of a deeper look so that the carving is more inset. That's totally possible depending on what your preference is. So once all those outside layers are on, I just make sure that everything is level and I set it aside to dry for a short while. Now onto my handles for my drawers. You might recognise these little parts from another video I did with my 3D pen. So I made these myself with my 3D pen, and it's quite possible for you to do it as well. I will see if I can link the video where I did these, but essentially I just used a toothpick and I ran the 3D pen over the top and then pulled the toothpick out, and voila, I had a handle. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm going through my little pile of handles, because you know they're handmade, they're all different, and I'm finding the two that match the most. Once I found these, I'm using gem glue, and that is because these are plastic pieces from my 3D pen, so gem glue for me has been the best glue to use with plastics and acetate and metal, things like that. So I do recommend using your gem glue here. Attach these onto the top of that little decorative pattern that you've made, and they turn into awesome little handles. Now I think I just used a brass PLA 175 or 1.75 mil when I made these, and I've got to say I'm really impressed with what a 3D pen can do for miniatures. So if you have the opportunity, do give it a go. So the next thing for me to do is a little bit of patchwork. So initially I went over the bits where I thought it needed a bit of work with burnt umber, and then I realized it was just a bit too red. So I'm now using raw umber and just using the tiniest amount to go over the top of that, and that seems to be enough to just even things out again. So I'm just going over all of the parts where I might have missed a little bit, or there's been a part that's chipped off during construction, and it's just a bit of maintenance work to make sure that the piece looks authentic and finished. And there you have it. So before I finish up, I'm going to put one final coat of varnish onto the piece, just to go over those bits where I did the patchwork and give it one last coat of protection and shine. Well, that's it from me today, guys, and I do hope very much that you've enjoyed this video today. If you would like to, please consider subscribing to my channel for more videos like this, and do see if you can find me on my social medias as well. I am on Facebook and also on Etsy, where you can purchase this piece in SVG if you would like to make it yourself. Do take care of yourself and each other, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.